I paid for every ticket, every room, every detail of that family trip, and still, at the airport, I was told I did not belong. In front of strangers, in front of my own son, I heard the words no mother should ever hear. You shouldn't be here. What broke in that moment was not just my heart, but years of silent sacrifice I had mistaken for love. And what I did next was something no one saw coming. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Collins, but most people call me Maggie. I am 68 years old, a retired nurse, and I live alone in a small lakeside house in Seattle, Washington. The house is quiet now, far quieter than it used to be, and sometimes the silence feels heavier than anything I carried during my 40 years in the hospital. Back then, my days were filled with urgency, purpose, and people who needed me. Now, the only sounds are the wind brushing against the water and the ticking of the kitchen clock that never seems to pause. I spent most of my life taking care of others. It was not just a job, it was who I was. I worked long shifts, missed holidays, and stood beside patients in their most fragile moments. That same instinct followed me home. My husband, Thomas, was a firefighter, strong and steady, the kind of man who never complained even when his lungs began to fail him after years of service. When he got sick, I became his nurse in every sense of the word. I managed his medications, stayed awake through long nights, and held his hand when the pain became too much. Before he passed, he told me I had always taken care of everyone else, and that one day I needed to take care of myself. I remember nodding, but I never truly learned how. After Thomas was gone, my world narrowed to one person, my son, Daniel. He had always been my pride, my purpose, and in many ways, my anchor. When he was younger, we were inseparable. He called me often, asked for advice, and never made a decision without talking it through with me. I believed that closeness would last forever, but things began to change when he married Rebecca. Rebecca entered our lives like a polished photograph, flawless and composed. She was charming, well-spoken, and always knew the right thing to say in public. At first, I welcomed her with open arms. I wanted Daniel to be happy, and I told myself that gaining a daughter-in-law meant gaining more family. But over time, I noticed small shifts that were easy to dismiss individually, but impossible to ignore when they began to form a pattern. Conversations that once included me slowly became decisions made without me. Invitations became less frequent, and when I was included, it was usually because something was needed. Rebecca had a way of guiding situations without appearing forceful. She would suggest things in a tone so gentle that it felt unreasonable to disagree. Daniel followed her lead more often than not, and I watched as the son who once leaned on me began to drift further away. I told myself this was normal, that children grow up and build their own lives, but there was a difference between independence and distance. What I felt was distance. I adapted the only way I knew how. I made myself useful. I helped with the grandchildren whenever they asked. I cooked meals, ran errands, and occasionally helped them financially when things were tight. Each time I said yes, I told myself I was strengthening our bond. But slowly, without realizing it, my role changed. I was no longer just a mother. I had become a solution. There were moments when I sensed something was not right. A delayed reply to a message, a visit that felt more like an obligation than a desire, a conversation that ended too quickly. Those moments lingered, but I pushed them aside. I convinced myself that love meant giving without question. I believed that if I continued to show up, continued to support them, everything would remain intact. Still, late at night, when the house was silent and there was nothing to distract me, a thought would quietly surface. Something is changing. And each time it did, I buried it just as quickly, choosing peace over truth, even if that peace was only temporary. If you're still watching and you can already feel something isn't quite right beneath the surface, comment number 1 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move on to what started to change everything in Chapter 2. Thanksgiving at Daniel's house used to feel like something I looked forward to all year. The smell of roasted turkey, the soft hum of conversation, the laughter of children echoing through the rooms. That evening had all the same elements, at least on the surface. The table was beautifully set, every detail arranged with care. Rebecca had outdone herself, as she always did when there was an audience to impress. The candles were perfectly aligned, the plates matched, and even the napkins were folded in a way that looked like it came from a magazine. I sat at the edge of the table, watching everything unfold. Daniel moved in and out of the kitchen, helping where he could, though he seemed more tired than usual. His responses were shorter, his smiles less frequent. Rebecca, on the other hand, carried the evening with ease. She directed conversations, guided the flow of dinner, and filled any silence before it could settle. To anyone else, it would have looked like a perfect family gathering. The only moments that felt real to me were when my grandchildren ran up to hug me. Their small arms wrapped around me without hesitation, without expectation. They did not see roles or obligations. They just saw their grandmother. I held on to those moments longer than necessary, as if they could anchor me to something steady. Dinner moved along smoothly until Rebecca leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression thoughtful in a way that immediately caught my attention. She began talking about how quickly time was passing, how the children were growing up faster than any of us realized. She mentioned how important it was to create memories while we still could. Her tone was soft, almost reflective, but there was a precision to her words that made me listen more carefully. Then she introduced the idea, a family trip to Hawaii. She described it in vivid detail, the blue water, the warm air, the kind of place where families reconnect and leave their worries behind. The children's eyes lit up instantly, their excitement filling the room with energy. Daniel smiled, but it was a hesitant smile. He mentioned how expensive something like that would be and how work had been unpredictable lately. There was a brief pause after he spoke. It was subtle, but I felt it. Rebecca did not respond directly to him. Instead, her gaze shifted toward me just for a moment before she looked back at her plate. It was enough. The expectation did not need to be spoken out loud. I felt it settle over me, quiet but undeniable. I had seen this pattern before, though never quite so clearly. Part of me wanted to stay silent, to let the moment pass without stepping into it. But then my granddaughter asked if the ocean really looked as blue as in the pictures she had seen. Her voice carried a kind of hope that was impossible to ignore. I remembered a trip Thomas and I had taken years ago, the way the water stretched endlessly, the way we had laughed without thinking about tomorrow. For a moment, that memory softened something in me. I told myself I could help, that it would be a gift, something meaningful, something that might bring us closer again. When I offered to contribute, Rebecca's face brightened immediately. She thanked me, her voice warm, but there was something rehearsed about it. Daniel looked at me with relief more than gratitude, and that small difference did not go unnoticed. Within minutes, Rebecca was already discussing plans, timelines, and costs, moving forward as if the decision had always been hers to make. I sat there, nodding along, feeling a quiet shift inside me. The room was still warm, still filled with light and conversation. But somewhere beneath it all, I felt a chill that I could not quite explain. And as I looked around the table, I realized that I had already stepped into something I might not be able to step out of. If you're still watching and you sense the pressure behind that perfect invitation, comment number 2 below to let me know you're paying attention. Now, let's see how things began to shift in Chapter 3. The days after Thanksgiving moved quickly, but there was a quiet weight following me that I could not ignore. I told myself I had made the right decision, that helping with the trip was something meaningful, something that would bring us closer together again. Still, every time I opened my bank account or reviewed the numbers in my notebook, I felt a small tightening in my chest. This was not a small gesture. It was a significant portion of what I had spent years building. I sat at my kitchen table one morning, my laptop open, a cup of coffee growing cold beside me. The airline website glowed on the screen as I carefully selected flights that would work for everyone. I made sure the departure times were reasonable for the children, that the layovers were not too long, that everything would be as smooth as possible. When I confirmed the purchase, the total amount appeared in bold numbers, $5,000 for the flights alone. I hesitated for a moment before clicking submit, but I did it anyway. I told myself this was what family meant. A few days later, Rebecca sent me a link for the resort. It was beautiful, more extravagant than I had expected. Ocean views, private pools, and amenities that felt more like a luxury magazine than something I would have chosen for myself. The total for the stay came to $6,500. I paused longer this time, reading through the details carefully. There were multiple room options, different layouts, different pricing tiers. Before I could even ask a question, another message arrived explaining which option had already been selected. It was a large villa with multiple bedrooms, ideal for a family. And then, almost as an afterthought, there was a note that a smaller adjoining room had been reserved for me. The explanation was brief, framed as practical, something about giving the children more space. I stared at the screen, reading the message more than once. I had not been asked what I preferred. The decision had already been made. I completed the booking anyway. After that, everything seemed to shift. A group message was created to coordinate the trip, but it did not feel like a conversation. It felt like instructions. Updates appeared throughout the day, outlining schedules, activities, and expectations. Times for departure, lists of what to pack, reminders about documents. My role in these messages was clear. I was expected to follow along. I tried to participate. I asked a question about one of the excursions, something simple, just to understand how the day would unfold. Rebecca responded politely, but her answer closed the door rather than opening it. She explained that everything had already been arranged and that I did not need to worry about the details. The message was courteous, but the meaning underneath it was unmistakable. Daniel remained mostly silent in the conversation. When he did respond, it was brief and supportive of whatever Rebecca had already decided. There was no acknowledgement of what I had contributed, no moment where he paused to recognize the effort behind it. That absence lingered more than anything else. I found myself sitting alone in my living room one evening, scrolling through the confirmation emails, flights, reservations, receipts, each one a record of what I had done, what I had given. And yet, the more I looked at them, the less I felt connected to the trip itself. It was a strange realization, one that settled slowly but firmly. I had paid for something that I did not truly belong to. The plans were moving forward, detailed and complete, but I was not part of the process. I was simply part of the arrangement. For the first time, I began to understand that this was not just about a vacation. Something else was unfolding, something I had allowed without fully seeing it. And as I closed my laptop that night, I felt a quiet certainty that I was losing control over something that had never really been mine to begin with. If you're still watching and you noticed how quickly respect started to disappear once the money was paid, comment number 3 below to let me know you're with me. Now let's move into chapter 4, where things get even more personal. In the weeks leading up to the trip, something inside me shifted from quiet unease to a need to fix what I could no longer ignore. I told myself that maybe the problem was not as serious as it felt, that perhaps I just needed to be more involved, more present. If I showed interest, if I contributed more than money, maybe I could find my place again within the family. I started with something simple. One afternoon, I sat down with my laptop and began researching activities in Hawaii that would be enjoyable for everyone. I focused on things I could share with my grandchildren, gentle excursions that would not feel rushed, moments where we could slow down and actually be together. I found a guided nature walk along the coast, a small boat tour with calm waters, and a cultural center that offered storytelling sessions for children. Each option felt thoughtful, something meaningful rather than overwhelming. When I sent the suggestions into the family group message, I hesitated before pressing send. I read through my words more than once, making sure they sounded light, not intrusive. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. Rebecca responded later that evening. Her message was polite, carefully worded, but it closed the conversation before it could begin. She explained that the schedule had already been arranged and that the activities I mentioned might be too tiring for me. She added that I should focus on relaxing while they handled the more active plans. The tone was gentle, almost considerate, but the meaning beneath it settled heavily on me. I was not being included. I was being set aside. I stared at the message longer than I should have. A part of me wanted to respond, to insist that I was capable, that I wanted to be involved. Instead, I told myself she meant well, that she was trying to look out for me. It was easier to believe that than to accept the alternative. A few days later, I called Daniel. I kept my voice calm, careful not to sound upset. I asked about the trip, about how things were coming together, and whether there might be space for some quieter activities with the children. He listened, but his responses were vague. He said everything was already organized and that I should not worry about the details. He assured me that everything would be fine once we were there. When the call ended, I felt no closer to him than before. The moment that changed everything came unexpectedly. I stopped by their apartment one afternoon to drop off a small bag of things I had picked up for the children. Rebecca answered the door with her phone pressed to her ear. She did not see me right away, and I heard just enough before she noticed I was there. Her voice was light, almost amused, as she explained to someone that they had to bring me along because I had paid for the trip. The words were not loud, but they did not need to be. She ended the call quickly when she saw me, her expression shifting into something polite and familiar. I handed her the bag without saying anything more than necessary, then turned and left. I did not trust my voice to hold steady if I stayed. In the elevator, I stood alone, staring at my reflection in the mirrored walls. I felt something deep and quiet settle inside me. It was not anger, not yet. It was something heavier, something closer to understanding. Even then, I did not change my decision. I told myself I was doing this for my grandchildren, that their happiness mattered more than my discomfort. I chose to move forward, even though I no longer trusted the situation I was walking into. If you're still watching, and that moment of truth hit harder than expected, comment number 4 below to let me know you're still here. Now get ready, because chapter 5 is where everything explodes. The morning of the trip arrived long before the sun had fully risen. I woke up before my alarm, already tense, as if my body understood something my mind had not yet accepted. By the time I left the house, the sky was still a dull gray, and the air carried that cold, damp chill Seattle was known for. I arrived at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport earlier than necessary, just as I always did. I had spent my life making sure I was never the one causing delays, never the one people had to wait for. The airport was already alive with the movement. Suitcases rolled across polished floors, voices echoed through the terminals, and announcements cut through the air in a steady rhythm. People moved with purpose, heading toward destinations that felt certain. I stood near the check-in area, holding my handbag close, watching the crowds pass as I waited for my family. I checked my phone. No messages. I had sent a simple note earlier letting them know I had arrived, but there was no response. Minutes stretched longer than they should have, and a quiet unease settled over me. I told myself they were on their way, that traffic might have slowed them down. Still, standing there alone, I felt like I was already outside something I was supposed to be part of. When they finally appeared, Rebecca was the first one I noticed. She walked ahead of the others with quick, confident steps, her posture straight, her expression already tight with impatience. Daniel followed behind her, carrying bags and guiding the children, who seemed more interested in their own small distractions than the trip itself. I smiled as they approached, doing my best to hold on to a sense of normalcy. Rebecca barely acknowledged me before turning her attention to the check-in screens. She began organizing everything immediately, directing Daniel, adjusting bags, moving the children along. I stepped closer, offering information I had already checked, trying to be helpful without intruding. She dismissed it with a brief glance, as if my input was unnecessary. We joined the line, and for a moment, everything seemed manageable. Then I asked a simple question about the connecting flight, something practical, something any traveler might ask. The reaction was immediate and sharp. Rebecca turned toward me, her frustration no longer hidden. Her voice rose, cutting through the surrounding noise in a way that made people turn and look. She told me I was slowing everything down, that I kept asking questions, that I did not understand how things worked. And then, louder than anything else, she said I should not be there. The words hung in the air, heavier than the noise around us. I felt my body freeze, my hands tightening around my bag. It was not just what she said, but how easily she said it, as if it had been waiting beneath the surface all along. I became aware of the people watching, of the silence that followed her outburst, of the way the moment seemed to stretch. I looked at Daniel. I needed him to say something, anything, to acknowledge what had just happened, but he did not. His eyes dropped to the floor, his posture stiff, as if avoiding the moment could erase it. That silence landed deeper than Rebecca's words ever could. The children grew quiet, their earlier energy fading into confusion. I could see it in their faces, the way they looked between us without understanding. I wanted to protect them from the moment, but I could not even protect myself. Something inside me shifted then. It was not sudden or dramatic, but it was clear. The hurt, the confusion, the doubt I had been carrying all these weeks began to settle into something else, something steadier. I took a breath, steadying my voice as best as I could. I said I was going to the restroom. No one stopped me. Rebecca had already turned away, continuing with the check-in process as if nothing important had happened. Daniel remained silent. I walked away from them, my steps slow but deliberate. With each step, the noise of the airport returned, blending back into the background. But inside me, something had changed, and for the first time, I was not walking away to avoid a problem. I was walking toward a decision. The restroom felt like a different world the moment I stepped inside. The noise of the terminal faded into a dull echo behind closed doors, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint sound of running water. It was quiet in a way that forced me to hear my own thoughts more clearly than I wanted to. I moved into the last stall and locked the door, then sat down slowly, my hands trembling more than I expected. My heart was still racing from what had just happened, each beat sharp and insistent in my chest. I tried to take a steady breath, but it came out uneven, as if my body had not yet caught up with the calm I was trying to force. For a moment, I simply sat there, staring at the floor, replaying everything. Rebecca's voice, loud and certain, the way people had turned to look, the silence that followed, and Daniel standing there saying nothing. That silence stayed with me more than anything else. I reached into my bag and took out my phone. My fingers hesitated over the screen before I unlocked it. The airline application opened automatically, as if it had been waiting. My reservation appeared with all 5 names listed together: mine, Daniel's, Rebecca's, the children's. Seeing them there, connected under my account, stirred something complicated inside me. This was something I had created, something I had paid for piece by piece, believing it would bring us together. Now it felt like evidence of something else entirely. I opened the flight details and scrolled through the information more carefully than I had before. That was when I noticed it. The seating assignments were not the same. Rebecca and Daniel had been placed in business class, while my seat remained in economy. The difference was clear, intentional, and impossible to explain away. I stared at the screen, reading it again just to be sure. A quiet realization settled over me, heavier than anything I had felt earlier. This was not thoughtlessness. It was a decision, one that had been made without me, using something I had provided. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. For the first time, the hesitation I had been holding on to began to slip. I thought about the past few weeks, about every moment I had questioned myself instead of what was happening around me. I thought about Thomas and the way he had looked at me in his final days, telling me I needed to take care of myself. The option to manage the reservation sat in front of me. I tapped it, and the screen shifted to a list of choices. Cancellation was there, simple and direct. A message appeared explaining the terms, the partial refund, the credit that would remain. I read it carefully, my mind clearer than it had been all morning. I selected the names one by one: Daniel, Rebecca, the children. I left my own untouched. There was a pause before the final confirmation, a moment where everything seemed to hold still. I knew what this would mean. I knew there would be consequences. But for the first time, I also knew that doing nothing would cost me more. I confirmed the cancellation. The screen updated quietly, almost without ceremony. It was done. I sat there for a few seconds longer, waiting for some overwhelming feeling to follow. Instead, what came was stillness. My breathing slowed. The tightness in my chest eased just enough for me to notice the difference. I moved through the rest of it with a steadiness I had not felt before. I canceled the hotel reservation, knowing the timing allowed for a refund. Then I searched for something else. Not Hawaii. Somewhere new. Somewhere that belonged only to me. When I stood and looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw the same face, the same lines, the same person I had always been. But something behind my eyes had changed. I was no longer waiting to be included. If you're still watching and you didn't expect that decision, comment number 6 below to let me know you're still with me. Now, let's move into Chapter 7, where the consequences unfold. When I stepped out of the restroom, the noise of the airport returned all at once, but it no longer overwhelmed me the way it had before. People moved quickly past me, Announcements echoed above, and the steady rhythm of rolling suitcases filled the space. Everything was exactly the same, yet something inside me had shifted so completely that it felt like I was walking through a different place. I saw them immediately at the check-in counter. Rebecca stood slightly ahead, her posture tense, her movements sharp with impatience. Daniel stood beside her, holding one of the children's bags, his expression distracted but uneasy. The children were quieter now, staying close, as if they could sense something unsettled in the air. I walked toward them at a steady pace. My steps were not hurried, but they were not hesitant either. For the first time that morning, I did not feel the need to adjust myself to fit into their space. Rebecca turned as I approached. Her expression tightened the moment she saw me, irritation already present before I had even spoken. She asked for my passport without looking at me for more than a second, as if the process was simply continuing. I told her calmly that I was not checking in. At first, she did not understand. She assumed I was confused, that I had misunderstood the process or was delaying things again. I repeated myself, more clearly this time, and said that I was not traveling with them. The shift in her expression was immediate. Confusion gave way to disbelief, and then something sharper. Daniel looked at me, his face tightening as he tried to follow what I was saying. I held his gaze just long enough to make sure he was listening. I told them that I had canceled the tickets. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The movement around us continued, but within that small space, there was only silence. Then Rebecca reacted. Her voice rose, cutting through the surrounding noise, demanding an explanation, accusing me of ruining everything. The words came quickly, one after another, but I did not respond to them in the same way I might have before. The airline employee at the counter glanced between us, then turned back to his screen. After a few seconds, he confirmed that the reservations under Daniel and Rebecca's names had been canceled. His tone was neutral, but it carried enough weight to settle the question of whether this was real. Rebecca's anger shifted into something more frantic. She insisted that I could not do that it was unfair, that there had to be some mistake. But there was no mistake. I had made the decision, and I understood it fully. Daniel finally spoke, his voice uncertain, asking me why I would do something like this. I answered him quietly, without raising my voice. I told him that I had paid for the trip, that I had been treated as though I did not belong, and that I would not continue to accept that. The children stood close together, watching us with wide, uncertain eyes. I crouched slightly to meet them at their level, my voice softening as I spoke to them. I told them I loved them and that this was not their fault. They did not fully understand, but they listened. Rebecca tried to recover control, shifting her tone, softening her voice, offering something that sounded like an apology. But it came too late, and it did not reach me the way it once might have. I stood there, steady and certain, no longer questioning myself. There was no going back from this moment, and for the first time, I did not want to. The tension at the check-in counter did not disappear, but it changed. The sharp edge of Rebecca's anger began to shift into something less certain, something closer to desperation. I could see it in the way her posture softened just slightly, in the way her voice lost its earlier confidence. She tried to explain herself, saying she had been stressed, that the morning had been overwhelming, that she had not meant what she said. The words sounded like an apology, but they did not carry the weight of one. I listened without interrupting, but I no longer felt the urge to accept what was being offered. There was a difference between acknowledging harm and trying to smooth it over. For the first time, I could see that difference clearly. Daniel stood beside her, his expression unsettled. He looked between us as if trying to find a place to stand that would not force him to choose. But there was no neutral ground anymore. I turned toward him, not with anger, but with a steadiness I had never allowed myself before. I told him that this was not about a single moment at the airport. It was about everything that had led to it. The silence, the decisions made without me, the way I had been treated as something useful rather than someone valued. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had prepared. Inside were the confirmations, the receipts, every record of what I had paid for. I handed it to him, watching as he flipped through the pages. Each line, each number, spoke for itself. Rebecca leaned in, her expression shifting as she realized what he was seeing. There was no room left for denial. I explained that my decision was not sudden. It had been building quietly, shaped by every moment I had chosen to ignore. I told them that I would not continue to support a situation where I was not respected. My voice remained calm, but there was no uncertainty in it. Then I said something I had not planned to say until that moment. I told them about the education fund I had set aside for the children. It was something I had created over time, adding to it whenever I could, thinking of their future. I explained that it would remain untouched for now, but that I would not continue contributing if things stayed the same. Daniel's reaction was immediate. It was not anger, but realization. For the first time, he looked at me with something that felt like understanding. Rebecca, on the other hand, seemed to lose her footing entirely. She tried once more to redirect the conversation, to bring it back to the children, to what they were missing. I did not argue with her. I simply separated what needed to be separated. I told them that my love for the children was not in question, but that love did not mean allowing myself to be treated without respect. The noise of the airport continued around us, but it felt distant. I was no longer part of the tension in the same way. I had said what needed to be said, and for the first time, I was not waiting for their response to define what came next. If you're still watching and you feel that shift in power, comment number 8 below to let me know you're ready for the ending. Now let's move into the final outcome of this story. I did not stay at the check-in counter any longer than necessary. Once I had said what needed to be said, I turned and walked away. I did not wait to see how Rebecca would respond or whether Daniel would call after me. For the first time, I understood that staying would only pull me back into something I had already chosen to step out of. The airport stretched out in front of me, wide and busy, filled with people moving in every direction. Earlier that morning, the noise had felt overwhelming, like something pressing in on me. Now it was different. It faded into the background, no longer something I needed to fight against. I walked at a steady pace, my steps unhurried, my mind clearer than it had been in a long time. There was a moment, as I passed a large window overlooking the runway, when I paused. Planes moved in the distance, lifting slowly into the sky, each one carrying people towards somewhere new. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, not looking back, but acknowledging quietly that something had ended behind me. Then I kept walking. I made my way toward the airline desk for my new flight. The process was simple. My reservation was already confirmed, my seat assigned. The woman at the counter checked my identification and printed my boarding pass without complication. There was no tension, no confusion, no expectation that I needed to adjust myself for anyone else. With the boarding pass in my hand, I moved toward the gate and found a seat near the window. I sat down and placed my bag beside me, taking a slow breath as I settled into the moment. This time, I was alone by choice. That difference mattered more than I expected. I watched the people around me without feeling the need to compare my situation to theirs. Families sat together. Couples spoke quietly. Children moved with restless energy. It all felt distant, not in a lonely way, but in a way that gave me space. My phone vibrated in my bag. I took it out and saw Daniel's name on the screen. A missed call. Then another notification followed, a message waiting to be read. I did not open it right away. I looked at his name for a moment, feeling the familiar pull of everything we had been to each other. That had not disappeared. But something else had changed. I no longer felt the need to respond immediately, to fix what he might be feeling, to make things easier for him. I placed the phone back in my bag, not as a rejection, but as a decision to take my time. When the boarding announcement came, I stood with the rest of the passengers. The movement felt natural, steady. I followed the line forward, step by step, until I reached the gate. As I handed over my boarding pass, I realized something simple but important. I was not leaving something behind. I was finally moving towards something that belonged to me. The plane lifted gently off the runway, and as the ground beneath us began to shrink, I felt a quiet stillness settle inside me. The steady hum of the engine filled the cabin, constant and reassuring, like a rhythm I could finally match. I sat by the window, watching as the city disappeared beneath a layer of clouds, soft and endless, separating me from everything I had just left behind. For the first time in a long while, there was nothing demanding my attention, no expectations, no decisions to manage for someone else, no need to explain myself, just space. And in that space, my thoughts came into focus with a clarity I had not allowed myself before. I thought about everything that had led me here, all the years I had spent giving without question, believing that love meant putting others first, no matter the cost. I had built my life around that belief, shaping my choices, my relationships, even my sense of self. It had felt right for so long that I never stopped to ask what it was taking from me. What I understood now was not sudden or dramatic. It was simple. Love, without boundaries, does not grow stronger. It stretches until it begins to lose its shape, until the person giving becomes invisible within it. That was what had happened to me, slowly and quietly, over time. I did not blame Daniel entirely. I loved him too much for that, and I knew that part of this story belonged to me as well. I had allowed things to continue because it was easier than facing what they meant. I had mistaken silence for peace and patience for strength, when in truth, I was avoiding the discomfort of change. That had changed now. My love for my grandchildren remained untouched by everything that had happened. They were not part of the choices that had led us here, and I held onto the hope that one day they would understand. But love for them did not require me to give up myself. That was something I finally saw clearly. As the plane moved higher, the clouds below looked almost like a blank page, something open and unmarked. It felt like a quiet reminder that life does not end at a single moment of conflict. It shifts. It redirects. I was not running away from anything. I was stepping into something I had denied myself for years, and for the first time, I was not asking for a place in someone else's life. I was creating my own. In life, there comes a moment when silence is no longer peace, and giving without limits begins to erase who we are. True love is not measured by how much we endure, but by how much we honor our own worth. Boundaries are not walls meant to push others away. They are foundations that protect what is most valuable within us. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that restore our dignity, reminding us that respect is not something we beg for, but something we choose to require. Growth does not always look like reconciliation. Sometimes, it looks like walking forward alone, steady and unafraid, trusting that what is meant to stay will find its way back with greater understanding. Thank you for being here and sharing this journey. If this story resonated with you, feel free to leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more meaningful stories.